I was sitting outside on the balcony at night in the dark, searching for new stories to translate for the channel, and I came across a new website where someone had shared 11 short-form true scary stories, or so they claim. I'll let you decide for yourself, but I got pretty creeped out with a few of them. Let me know which one scared you the most. Considering they're all pretty short, I've added a bonus story at the end for those of you who want to enjoy this video a bit more. And I promise you, the last story won't disappoint. Alright, let's begin. This is a story that happened about 13 years ago. At that time, I was still a student and often met up with friends at the entrance of my apartment building. There were 3 chairs on the right side of the elevator and 2 on the left side, and we often sat on the right. Come to think of it, I'd never seen anyone sitting on the left side. There weren't any scary rumors going around, but I found it strange that those seats were always empty. It's almost like people unconsciously avoided them. Anyway, one night my friend Aiko was coming to stay over the night, so I was bumming around at home waiting for her. When I realized it was already 8 p.m. and she was meant to come over at 7. I tried calling her, but she didn't answer, so I decided to walk down to the ground floor and wait for her there. After about 15 minutes, a woman whom I'd never seen before walked in through the entrance. I expected her to press the elevator button to go up to her unit, but instead she sat in one of the chairs on the left side.
That's strange,
I thought. She remained silent and kept her head down. I started to feel a bit creeped out and scared, so I decided to head back up to my apartment when Aiko finally walked in. Feeling relieved, I started to say,
"Hey, what took you so long? I was starting to get worried."
But before I could finish the sentence, and without a word, she grabbed my arm and got into the elevator. Once inside, I asked her what was wrong because her behavior was really odd. She said with a flustered look on her face,
"That woman down there, she scared the shit out of me." "What? Why?"
I asked.
I left home at 6 to make sure I'd be here by 7, but on the way here I noticed some woman was following me, and no matter how hard I tried, I just couldn't get to your apartment. I thought I was walking towards your place, but I kept coming back to the same place over and over again. I was honestly freaking out that I got sucked into another dimension or something. And the woman, she kept getting closer. Anyway, I finally got to your apartment, and when I saw that woman on the chair, she was the same person that had been following me. And she had the biggest grin on her face.
I could tell from the way she was speaking and her body language that she wasn't lying. I replied,
Wait. How did you even see her face? She was looking down the whole time."
Aiko looked up at me. She was freaking out and she was beginning to shiver. She said,
"What are you talking about? Didn't you see her staring at you with that grin on her face?"
When I heard that, I got goosebumps and chills all over, and as soon as the elevator doors opened, we ran into my apartment. Who was that woman? Why was she following my friend? And why was she smiling at me? After some time passed, I heard that a woman was murdered by someone at the entrance of the apartment building. She apparently didn't die instantly, but was found lying on the left side of the elevator and was later confirmed dead at the hospital. I don't know if that case is related to the incident, but I can't help but feel that somehow it is. A few years ago, I moved from the countryside to the city where my father lives and worked part-time. Considering the rent was higher in the city, I wanted to get another part-time job, so I was desperately looking for a good one. Then my father called me and asked me if I wanted to work with him. The job involved working inside a manhole. The daily wage was great, and more importantly, working with him in a still unfamiliar place was comforting, so I immediately agreed. The next day, I climbed into the manhole so he could explain what I had to do. But as soon as my feet touched the ground, I was overcome with an indescribable feeling. I don't know what it was, but I felt extremely uneasy and started to get a headache. I've always had a kind of psychic ability and saw spirits quite often. Whatever I felt down there wasn't anything good. That much I knew, but I couldn't go home on my first day on the job, so I endured it. The day ended without incident and I continued to work for a few days. Lucky for me, the initial ominous feeling I had subsided as the days passed. After about a week, things changed. On that day, I saw a spirit inside the manhole. It was wandering around, and I didn't see just one, but several of them. It was creepy as hell, but if you've been seeing spirits since you're a kid, you learn to live with them and ignore them when push comes to shove. I did my best not to look at them. But the next day, while I was working with my father and 3 other co-workers, the first spirit I saw the day before appeared in front of me.
Shit,
I thought. I instinctively felt that it was dangerous. I wanted to run away, but my body wouldn't move and no one else noticed my predicament. The spirit just stood there, glaring at me. I couldn't close my eyes, so I couldn't look away, and I couldn't run away either. That's when the spirit suddenly went through my body, and my body began to convulse right as it did so. I collapsed in the spot and was rushed to the hospital. Since then, my legs have become semi-paralyzed, and upon many medical tests, the cause is still unknown. Even now, several years later, I can't bend my legs normally, and sometimes my hands also becomes affected, but it's not constant. To this day, I continue to go to the hospital to receive treatment. In my case, it was just a chance encounter with a spirit. I didn't go out seeking it. Although I chose to continue working underground even though I knew something evil was down there, it was more about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. But everyone, please stop going out of your way to see ghosts or experience anything paranormal. There are spirits that are extremely dangerous out there. I'm happily married now and even have children, but I can't play football or tag with them. Just know that spirits can take away the things that we take for granted in a split second. Please be careful and heed my advice. This is a story that happened 2 years ago in October. I had made a promise to dress up with a friend for Halloween. It was only 10 days away and I wanted to dress up in a proper costume, so I was in a rush to get it ready. I hadn't even decided what to be, so I scoured the internet for some clothes that might look good on me, but I couldn't find anything. In the end, after talking to my friend, I decided to make my own costume and be a zombie. At the time, I had bright colored hair and wanted to make it a little darker, so I began looking for some cheap wigs. I turned to the internet again and found a black wig for 900 yen on a certain website. It was secondhand, but it said it was human hair, so I thought it would be realistic and bought it. The wig arrived safely 3 days later. It was from this day forward that I suddenly got sick with headaches and nausea. I went to the hospital and was told I had a cold, but my symptoms were too severe for that, and I felt so weak that I couldn't even walk at night. Something was definitely going on with me, so I decided to go to another hospital for a second opinion the next day. I forced myself to go to sleep, but something woke me up in the middle of the night. I looked at my phone. It was 2 a.m. I don't know why I suddenly woke up at this time and looked around groggily. And then I saw it. Someone was standing in the corner of the room. I could tell from the silhouette that it was a woman. I felt the blood drain from my body's extremities and my fingers and toes felt instantly ice cold. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't take my eyes off her and I couldn't move my body. She was looking off to the side. I don't have good eyesight and I usually can't see much in the dark, but for some reason, I could see her clearly. I tried desperately to close my eyes, but my body wouldn't listen. I was panicking and freaking out when the woman slowly began to turn her head towards me. I could tell she was looking at me and she was holding something in her hand. It was the wig that I'd bought. Before I had time to process anything, the woman came to me as if gliding on the floor and said,
"This is mine."
I could hear those words as clear as day, and out of sheer terror, I blacked out. When I woke up, it was morning. I wasted no time and took the wig to a shrine to purify it. Once there, the priest told me that the wig had a strong grudge attached to it and that I needed to get rid of it immediately. I therefore asked him to dispose of it, and since then I've completely recovered and haven't experienced anything freaky like that again. The hair on the wig must have belonged to the woman who appeared that night. I don't know what happened to her. It might have been an ikiryo of the woman who is still alive or the spirit of the woman who's long been dead. But I somehow doubt she willingly gave her hair for that wig to be made. The shop still operates today and continues to sell wigs made from real human hair, and they're all second-hand. I would recommend buying fake wigs if you ever need one. Let me jump in here real quick. If you've been listening to my channel for a while, you know what an ikiryo is by now, so I didn't bother explaining it this time. For those of you who are new, please check out my other video about it. I've put a link in the description box and at the end of the video. One day, I had a really bad dream. In the dream, I was in the hospital and there were people named Inoue and Kondo in the same room. They seemed to be good friends, so they often talked to each other, but I couldn't join in on their conversation. I was just standing there in the room watching them talk. Then, Inoue suddenly slumped over and died. At that moment, I woke up. The feeling of shock still lingered as I opened my eyes and breathed a sigh of relief, thankful that it was just a dream. A few minutes later, my girlfriend at the time came to my house. She worked as a nurse, and when she was on the night shift, she would always come to my house in the morning and then go back to work from there, so we were basically living together. To be honest, I still couldn't shake the feeling from the dream and was glad she came home when she did. I must have given off a weird vibe because she asked me whether I was okay. So naturally, I told her about the dream. I was describing everything to her when she told me that one of her patients' name was Mr. Inoue. I raised my eyebrows.
Wow, what a coincidence.
I thought, and jokingly asked her whether he had 2 moles next to his right eye. My girlfriend's face turned serious and she replied that he did indeed. We both stayed silent for a while, letting it sink in, but brushed it off as a big coincidence. It happened the next day. The real Mr. Inoue that my girlfriend was in charge of apparently collapsed from a heart attack and had died. It took everyone by surprise because he was hospitalized for a non-life-threatening minor operation and was about to be discharged in a few days. To be honest, I was scared. I'd never met the man, so how is it that I saw him in my dream? I tried not to think too much about it, but about a week later, I had a similar dream. This time, it wasn't Mr. Inoue who died, but his friend, Mr. Kondo. He suddenly began to have difficulty breathing and collapsed, and that's when I woke up. Another bad dream, and again, I had a sinking feeling. 2 hours later, my girlfriend came home and I told her about it straight away. She confirmed that the man in the same room as Inoue was Kondo. The physical description also matched to a T. There wasn't really anything we could do, so we just hoped that this wasn't going to be another precognitive dream. But the next day, when she got to work, she found out that Mr. Kondo had passed away. He had a sudden heart attack in the middle of the night. I still can't explain why I had these 2 dreams out of the blue. I'd never experienced anything like it before. Will I continue to have dreams like this in the future? And why am I seeing complete strangers? It would make more sense if my girlfriend had these dreams. It's been a few years now, and every night when I go to bed, I'm scared that I'll have another bad dream again. Three years ago, I was living in an apartment with a parking lot, and there was a space at the back that was big enough to fit 2 cars. I don't know why it wasn't being used, and lots of people threw their trash there, so no one really went near it because of the smell and how dirty it was. One day, I left to go do groceries in the evening. It was around 6 o'clock and was starting to get dark outside. When I finished and got back to the apartment, I saw a little girl hiding in that trash-filled lot. She was sitting alone with her head looking down at the pavement. I was initially startled when I saw her, but considering I could clearly see her, I figured she couldn't be a ghost or anything. I walked up to her and asked her if she was okay. The girl slowly raised her head and said,
"We're playing hide and seek."
And at that moment, the blood drained from my face. She was so pale she looked blue, and she stared at me with a huge smile. Her eyes didn't seem to belong to anyone living. I freaked out. I turned around and ran to the stairs to my apartment, but the girl was sitting on the stairs and looking in my direction. There was no way she could have gotten there before I did. I was too terrified to run past her, so I ended up running away from the apartment and waited for my family to get back so I could go home with them. It was around 9 p.m. when I finally made it back, and the girl was gone, and I haven't seen her since. I don't know who she was, but that smile still flashes in my mind's eye whenever I close my eyes. Six years ago, when I was 18, I was dating a girl called Kuniko. She liked all the cutesy girly things, and I often bought her stuffed animals. On one of our dates, we passed by a recycle shop. There was a teddy bear propped up by the window, and Kuniko fell in love with it. I personally don't think it's very hygienic to buy stuffed toys secondhand, and told her how I felt, but she said she didn't mind, so we went in and bought it. She was in a great mood for the rest of the day. The next day, however, I couldn't get in touch with her. It was strange because we would talk to each other every single day, whether it be a phone call or at the very least a few texts throughout the day. I got this weird feeling well up inside, so I went to her house to see her. When I rang the doorbell, her mother came out. I introduced myself to her, told her I was dating her daughter, and asked whether Kuniko was home. She said,
Yes. She's here, but she's up in her room. She's been acting a bit strange, so I don't think she wants any visitors right now. I don't know what it is, but she's acting like she's scared. She hasn't eaten anything since last night, and she started screaming in the middle of the night. I took her to the hospital first thing this morning, but the doctors couldn't find anything wrong with her.
As she was telling me all of this, the only thing I could think of was the second-hand teddy bear we bought the day before. I begged her to let me see Kuniko, and her mother finally agreed and let me in. I went straight to her room and opened the door without bothering to knock. She was sitting in the corner of the room and looked like she was cowering from something.
"Kuniko?"
As soon as she heard my voice, she suddenly started to act violently and began throwing box cutters, scissors, and anything else she could find towards me. Her mother heard the commotion and rushed into the room. We managed to pin Kuniko down to the ground until she calmed down. I stared at the bear that was sitting on the desk. It had red smears everywhere, and I think it was blood. As soon as Kuniko calmed down, I grabbed the bear and ran out of the house and took it to a nearby temple. The moment I reached the torii gate, I felt a sharp pain in my right hand, which was holding the bear. When I looked down, it was looking at me, and its mouth looked like a human mouth with the edges slit open into a wide grin. I blacked out. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed. I found out later that someone had called an ambulance when I fell to the ground. And the bear, it was apparently possessed by a very strong spirit with enough power to kill its owner. The priest took it to a famous shrine where it is still kept to this day. Since then, Kuniko has become mentally ill and is still in and out of the hospital. And I vowed to never buy anything secondhand again. A few months ago, I got really sick, so I took a day off work and was bedridden for most of the day. I couldn't eat and slept almost the entire day, and when I woke up, it was already 11 p.m. I mustered enough strength to eat some cold jelly, took some medicine, and went back to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up again, feeling like I was suffocating. I looked at the clock and it was 2 a.m. It was really cold and the air felt thick.
I need some water.
I lifted my heavy body out of bed and went to the kitchen to get some water. When I got back to my room, I noticed the temperature had dropped a few more degrees. I could see puffs of white as I breathed out. It was the middle of summer and I did have my aircon on, but it was automated to set it to a constant and comfortable 23 degrees Celsius or 74 degrees Fahrenheit. It was definitely not cold enough to see my breath. I was scared as hell to go into my room, but I was about to keel over, so I swallowed my irrational fear and climbed back into bed. I told myself that my fever was going up and that's why I felt so cold. I shut my eyes and tried to go back to sleep. I laid there in the silence for about a minute when I felt someone's presence and gaze on me. I opened my eyes and looked around, but there was obviously no one there. Regardless, I couldn't shake that feeling and my heart was reacting to it too, beating faster and pumping blood through my veins as if getting my body ready to either fight or flight. I looked over at the door to my room and that's when I saw it. There was a large man standing there. I couldn't utter a sound, nor could I move a single muscle in my body. I completely froze in terror. I shut my eyes tight and stayed still, barely breathing. I willed it to go away and leave me alone. I waited for what seemed like ages, maybe 15 minutes. I slowly opened my eyes again. He was still there, and he had come a bit closer. It was pitch dark, but I could see that he was standing there with his eyes closed. I can't even describe the terror and fear I felt. Anyway, I fell unconscious. When I woke up, it was morning and the man was gone. This was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. Who was that man and why were his eyes closed? Now, when I happen to wake up in the middle of the night for some reason, I'm scared shitless that I might see him standing at my doorway again. I moved into the house I'm living in now 4 months ago. The rent was cheap, so I decided to move in, but the real estate agent said that there was one drawback, that it was better not to open the window in the toilet because insects could easily get in through it. I was up on the 3rd floor, so it was hard for the air to get through. I wanted to open the window to ventilate, but since I don't like insects, I never bothered opening it since I moved in. A bit of humidity didn't bother me too much, and I lived comfortably until a few days ago. On that day, while I was in the bathroom, I felt like someone was watching me. Like I said, I was up on the 3rd floor, so that was impossible, so I chalked it up to my active imagination and ignored it. But ever since then, I started to hear noises in the middle of the night and would get chills randomly when I was at home. Not knowing what to expect, I decided to set up cameras around my apartment. I set one up in the kitchen, bedroom, toilet, and the closet. Compared to all the other rooms, the one taken of the toilet was really bad quality and there were strange creaking noises captured. I didn't know what it was, but I figured where I set the camera wasn't good, so I decided to move it. On my way to do so, I started up the other camcorder and filmed myself walking from the shower into the toilet. And this was the first time I decided to open the bathroom window to film what was outside. The window didn't open easily since it had been closed for God knows how long, but I finally managed to slide it open. I poked my hand that was holding the camera out first and then peered out the window. That's when I saw it. There was a face right to the side of the window. It was huge. It wasn't the size of a normal human head. It was glaring at me and had an expression that was a mix of anger and sadness. The moment I saw it, I fainted. When I woke up the next morning, I was lying on the bathroom floor and had a nasty bump on my forehead where I must have hit the side of the toilet bowl or something when I fell. When I had my wits about me, I shakily rewound the video, but the face wasn't captured in it. It was strange because it was angled exactly where I had seen it. I called the real estate agent right away, but he assured me this property wasn't a stigmatized property. No deaths had ever been reported. That to me sounds sus because he clearly told me not to open that window. They must know something is up, but they're keeping it under wraps. Either way, I've made arrangements to move out next month. I'm too scared to even go to the toilet now, so I walk to the convenience store when I need to go, which really sucks. I can't wait to get out of here. Hey everyone, if you don't know what stigmatized properties are, I have a creepy video that goes over it, so check it out if you haven't yet. I've put a link in the description box and at the end of the video. This is something that I experienced about a month ago. I live in an apartment, and for about 3 months I had been having trouble falling asleep at night and waking up many times in the middle of the night. Since I couldn't sleep anyway, I got into the habit of spending the night reading a book. After about 2 weeks of living like this, I noticed something. Every time at 2:34 in the morning, I would hear footsteps. They sounded like women's high-heel shoes coming up the stairs, but I would never hear any doors opening. At first, I didn't mind the footsteps and didn't think anything of it, but when I realized that they came at the same time every day, it started to really bother me. Then a month ago, I decided to look through the peephole in the front door when I heard the footsteps. I wanted to know who was coming home at the exact same time every single night. Since my apartment was right in front of the stairs, I knew I would be able to see this woman once she came up. At 2:30 a.m., I sat there, watching the minutes go by. I was really nervous for some reason. And then it was 2:34 and I heard the heels echoing up the stairs. I mustered up the courage to look through the peephole. I couldn't see anything. I could hear the heels, but that was it. And then, bam! A woman was suddenly peering back at me through the peephole. I almost fell back and pissed myself at the same time, but I managed to remain silent. I don't know how she appeared the way she did. There was no one there, and the next second, she was staring right back at me. She slowly knocked on my door. I obviously didn't answer it. I crept back into my room as quietly as I could, wrapped myself in my blanket, and waited for the first ray of sun. Once the sun was fully up, I crept to the door again and slowly looked through the peephole, but the woman was gone. The footsteps continued to come at the same time every single day. I still can't figure out if she's a living person or she's some kind of ghost. But there's no way in hell I'm ever going to look through that peephole again. I won't take responsibility for anything that happens after you read this story, so please do so at your own risk. This happened 3 years ago. One day, while browsing the internet, I found a bulletin board where the writer had shared a scary experience he had. It came with a warning that said that 80% of people who read it will have something freaky occur afterwards. Obviously, I didn't believe it at all. It was one of those baits to hook the more gullible and superstitious people. I've always enjoyed scary stories, so I proceeded to read without thinking twice about the warning. I won't go into details, but briefly put, the writer said that as a child he had frequent scary dreams. He would see a woman standing by his pillow, covered in blood. He was still little, but for some reason he felt like if he dreamt of her one more time, he would die. And then one day, she stopped appearing in his dreams. 19 years went by and he completely forgot about her until his wife said something to him. She told him that she was having recurring dreams of a woman covered in blood standing by her bed and looking down at her. He had sudden flashbacks of the woman from back in his childhood, but he kept it to himself. After that, his wife continued to see the bloody woman in her dreams until she suddenly died 6 months later. The thing is, the day before she died, she told her husband that she was afraid she will die if she dreamt of the woman one more time. She had no chronic illnesses and was in good health, So how could it happen, and what did she mean when she said she was afraid she might die? He couldn't stop thinking about it and kept it all to himself for an entire year. Then one day his friend from his uni days contacted him and invited him to go out for drinks with 2 other friends. Definitely needing a night out, he agreed, and the 4 of them were reunited a few days later. They drank and had a great time catching up. Eventually, the man got drunk and told his friends about the dream. He explained how he had them as a child and what happened to his wife, but his friends told him it was nothing. How could a dream kill anyone? They said, and told him not to delve too deep into it. The night ended on that note and everyone went home. After keeping all of it to himself for a year, the man felt lighter on his feet and felt the best he had in a long time. However, that was short-lived. 5 days later, one of his friends contacted him and said,
I saw that woman.
It was then that the man started to believe that if he ever told anyone about it, that those who heard it will begin to have the same dream. But if that's the case, why did he post it online for anyone to see? As expected, the message board was filled with comments from people who saw the same woman. I'm one of those people. I've seen her twice so far. The first time, she was just standing at my bedside looking down at me. The second time, she was standing at my bedside covered in blood. I'm scared I'll have this dream again. I regret ever reading this story. According to the man, his friend continues to see the woman to this day and he's afraid that he's going to die soon. So yeah, I hope you all think twice before proceeding to read or watch something that comes with clear warning signs. And I hope the bloody woman doesn't appear in your dreams tonight. This is a story that my mum experienced a few years ago. During the Obon period, most people in Japan go back to their hometown. It's an annual Japanese holiday that commemorates and remembers deceased ancestors. It is believed that their spirits return at this time to visit their relatives and has been celebrated in Japan for more than 500 years. It's actually Obon next week for us, from August 13th to the 16th. Anyway, back to the story. So, on this day, my mum, my sister and I were waiting for our other siblings to come home. My mum was in the kitchen and my sister and I were in the living room watching TV when we heard a scream come from the kitchen. I ran over to see if mum was all right. She was standing there, pale-faced, staring at the entrance to our house.
What's wrong?
I asked.
I just saw a man's face.
She had apparently heard a noise from the entrance, so she turned around to look, thinking one of our siblings had arrived. Instead, she saw a strange man's face staring at my mum from behind a shelf next to the entrance. And no, there's no space for a person to fit behind the shelf. My sister suggested that maybe someone had come home by mistake because it was a Obon season, but my mum said he didn't look alive and that the man's eyes were filled with rage. She saw that face just that one time, and we believe he came to our home by mistake. I heard from a neighbor that a man was found dead in one of the houses close to where we lived. Maybe he mistakenly thought this was his house and was angry when he saw strangers living in his house. Ever since this happened, I'm a little scared of the Obon festival. The following story is gory and involves a small child, so viewer discretion is advised. Every year when the new rice harvest season comes, my parents send me brown rice. So begins Shoko, a housewife. She claims to have no psychic abilities, but here is a frightening experience she had. I got some rice from my parents' house. Usually, my husband goes to polish the rice, but he was on a business trip at the time. Some extra info for you here. White rice is milled rice that has had its husk, bran, and germ removed. After milling, the rice is polished, resulting in a seed with a bright white, shiny appearance. When people receive or buy brown rice, they usually take them to coin-operated rice mills where they put the brown rice in and have the machine do all the work. You can even set the percentage so you can get half brown rice and half white rice, etc. These stations are more common in the countryside, but they're dotted around the big cities too. Back to the story. I'm a lazy person by nature. Even though it was the end of September, it was still really hot. It's a pain to go polish rice in the heat, but if I waited for my husband, I wouldn't have rice for a few days, and it didn't make sense to go buy white rice since there were 2 whole bags right in front of me. I'm also the type of person who has to act when I think of it, otherwise things never get done. So I decided to go to the rice mill in the middle of the day. Each bag of rice weighed 30 kilos and with great effort managed to get them into the car by myself. I drove to the nearest coin-operated rice mill, but it was under maintenance and out of service. I therefore drove a little further and found another station in the corner of the parking lot of a supermarket I often go to. The supermarket was inside a large complex that included a home center, a pachinko parlor, and more shops. It gets pretty busy even during the day on weekdays, but since the rice mill was at the edge of the parking lot, that corner was pretty empty. I was able to park my car right next to it to avoid having to carry 60 kilos of rice a long distance. When I opened the sliding door of the rice mill, the heat that had been trapped inside came out and it was unbearably hot inside. I carried the bags inside, inserted some change and started the milling process. I was already sweating when I poured the rice into it and set the empty rice bag in the receiving port. I was muttering how hot it was under my breath the whole time. While wiping the sweat from my face with the towel around my neck, I started to pedal the rice that had accumulated in the tray and dropped it into the rice bag. It was a boring task, so I took out my phone while occasionally pedaling. I repeated this simple task. I also checked every now and then to make sure the rice bag hadn't shifted out of the rice inlet. Then I thought I heard something. It was a strange voice coming from somewhere close by. I couldn't quite tell from exactly where, so I perked up and listened more carefully. I was sure of it. There was a baby crying somewhere. I looked up from my phone and spun my head around, but there was no one nearby, not even out in the parking lot. The voice was getting fainter, and I figured someone and their baby was heading away and into the shopping complex, so I went back to my phone. This time, I could hear it louder than before. Clearly, I was wrong. The baby was still around somewhere, so I raised my head and listened. And the cries gradually got louder. Or maybe it would be more accurate to say it got closer. Not knowing where the approaching voice was coming from, I decided to step outside. My eyes were naturally drawn to a small window in the rice mill. Through that window, you can see the amount of rice left inside. The brown rice was almost done and only occupied a couple of inches of space. But then I saw a baby inside. It was looking at me through the pane of glass. It wasn't a normal-looking baby. Its face was swollen and red, and the baby was banging on the window and crying as if it was asking for help. The next moment, it was screaming at the top of its lungs. It was impossible for a baby to be in a place like that. I freaked out and tried to go outside, but the sliding door slammed shut on its own with great force. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get it to open. The lock was on the outside and I could see that it wasn't locked, but the door was completely jammed and wouldn't budge. All the while, the baby, with its red, bloated face, continued to wail and cry through the small window. I looked back at it and tried to find a way to stop the machine and get the baby out. As this went on, the baby swelled up even more. Its face, which already looked like a full-blown balloon, became even puffier. Then it started crying as if it was in unbearable pain. I was completely helpless and horrified at what I was seeing. There had to be a limit to how bloated the baby could get, and it reached this point shortly after. I heard an otherworldly yelp, and then a bang. The baby's face popped open and bright red blood splashed all over the small window. I screamed, jumped back, and shut my eyes. I stayed like that for a while until I began to hear the sound of rice spilling onto the ground. When I opened my eyes, the polished rice was spilling out of the receiving hole, and it was stained red with blood. That's the last memory I have of the incident. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I had collapsed inside the station and was diagnosed with heat stroke. I was told that if they had found me a little later, that I would have died because the door to the station was closed and it was still high noon when they found me. Apparently, a security guard had come to check my car when he noticed it sitting outside the rice mill for quite some time. I'm so thankful that he did. My husband also rushed back home from his business trip when he heard what had happened. After giving me an IV drip and observing my condition, I was discharged the next day. I found out later that there had been a tragic incident in that parking lot in the past. Some stupid parents had left a newborn baby in the car while they went to go play pachinko. When the staff found the baby while patrolling the parking lot, he was already unconscious from heat stroke and was taken to the hospital, but he never regained consciousness and passed away. I wholeheartedly believe that's the baby that I saw. Anyway, that's the end of my experience, but there's a little postscript. The rice that I polished that time, obviously there was no blood on it, but when I cooked it, it tasted strange. My husband said that it tasted a bit like iron. I never told my husband about what I saw that day. It's true that I forgot to mention it because of the heat stroke I had and the shock that I was in from what I saw, but when I heard him say that, it made it even more difficult to bring up in conversation. There's still quite a bit of that rice left. I don't want to throw it away because I'm afraid I'll be cursed if I do so. I haven't eaten it at all though. I mix it in with another bag of rice and have my husband eat it. It might sound horrible, but that's the only thing I can think to do.